He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. "Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals," she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. "I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property," he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. "Property?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "I believe I own the land this bank is built on." At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. "Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building," Cliff stated. "This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank." "I did not say I own the bank," Maurice responded, his voice quiet. "I said I own the land. There is a distinction." Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, "Do you have any paperwork to back that up?" Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, "Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed." Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. "I've held on to this since my father passed," I said. "And he kept it since his father passed," Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. "This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared." Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. "I believe it's time for you to leave, sir," he stated. "I think it's time someone examines the contents," Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. "Connect me with regional compliance on the line." Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. "Do you want to sit down?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. "I've done enough sitting in my life." A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from the back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. "Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment?" Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Langston," Gerald stated cautiously, "I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents?" "My father kept it in a box of his belongings," Maurice responded. "He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing." Delgado appeared astonished. "You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active?" Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. "Thought it was junk at first," Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. "Legally," Maurice explained, "this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire." Delgado rubbed his temple. "That represented decades of transactions," Maurice stated, "and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself." Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. "We need to involve legal right away," he stated. "Already done," John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect." Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. "You are not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby. Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Bluntland Cooperative, and throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, when COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. "If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind." Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, "The property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale." John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. "That's correct." A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. "There's a public title gap," Gerald stated. "No signed release, no recorded sale." The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. "Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents?" John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. "Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives." Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable. Morris folded his arms. What's fair to you? John paused. That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity. Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured. The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers. Morris rose to his feet deliberately. There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance. Gerald approached. Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion. I attempted a subtle approach, Maurice stated. I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence. It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. Do you truly possess this? She inquired. I have always possessed it, he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. I'm sorry. Morris's expression eased a little. It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters. The bank's doors opened once more, and 2 additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. This is private property. A reporter responded, observing Maurice. Not for long. As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies? Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not asserting anything, he stated. I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate. Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. What outcome are you pursuing with this? Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. What I'm hoping for, he said finally, is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first. The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Look, sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared. There was laughter. Maurice intervened. You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant. No one spoke. Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge. As if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior. John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations. Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. Do you still believe this concerns finances? A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents. Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time? Maurice sighed, not an annoyance, simply in contemplation. Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times. He paused. There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me. He held it up gently. It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence. A woman from the crowd spoke softly. You kept the deed all these years? Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. Truly observing. Some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed. Not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believed I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as this exemplifies generational theft. To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like respect land rights. Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. Never thought I'd be allowed in here, he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. Mr. Langston, Clay began, settling across from him, let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms. Maurice listened intently, remaining still. You placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership. A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. You believe this is the core issue? He inquired, his voice level. It's a considerable sum, Clay stated. It's a price, Maurice replied, and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve. Clay released a sharp breath. What will be acceptable to you? Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances. Clay blinked. Are you serious? I'm absolutely serious. There's a significant pause. Then Clay said, I will present this to the board. You please do that. Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him, ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, we recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build. While corporate and sanitized, this statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, the most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who have been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. I didn't desire revenge, Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood. It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. Preserve your documents, he advised them. Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative. People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained. Builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger. Legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, I belong here too. The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost." Morris smiled, slow and genuine. "Good for you." She paused. "I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day." He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, "Yes, I will." He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat and gave it to her. "Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something." She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps that's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity. He ridiculed her speech, her attire, and even her willingness to voice her opinions. Yet, she remained composed, initiated playback, and observed the legal system expose him live. Danielle Riggins, having experienced much in her 42 years, recognized inconsistencies. The citation affixed to her windshield near the community center in Macon, Georgia, wasn't simply irritating, it felt targeted. She studied it briefly, peering at the listed offense. A citation for failing to yield in a pedestrian zone was received. However, she was not in the vehicle at the time of the alleged violation. Her Honda had been parked legally in front of the building while she was inside, leading a workshop for at-risk teens. She sighed, placing the paper into her bag. Danielle dedicates long hours as a youth counselor, providing assistance to kids who'd experienced hardship and lack sufficient support. Her financial status is modest. She is far from wealthy. Her profession consumed her, and with raising her teenage daughter and guiding children who resembled her younger self, her time was scarce. A penalty like this was more than just disappointing, it significantly impacted her schedule. However, it wasn't primarily about the financial burden. It was about the underlying issue of fairness. The subsequent evening, she sat at the kitchen table with a cup of mint tea and the citation before her. Her daughter, Aaliyah, was completing homework in the vicinity. "You're really going to fight it?" Aaliyah inquired, looking up from her textbook. Danielle chuckled quietly. "Yes, I'm weary of allowing things to pass." Aaliyah reclined. "Do you believe they will truly hear you?" Danielle paused, not responding immediately. She simply gazed out the window for a moment before replying, "I don't require them to listen. I need to be present and proceed according to my conditions." The following Monday, she contacted the municipal courthouse, requested a half day away from work, and highlighted her court date in red pen on the calendar. She chose a simple outfit for the hearing: dark jeans, a light blouse, and flats. No blazer, no makeup, just her natural appearance. The woman she saw in the mirror appeared weary, but also resolute. As she prepared to leave, she placed her phone in her back pocket, activated the voice memo app, and began recording. It wasn't an expectation, but a habit formed by experience. She's learned that people sometimes react negatively when a black woman asserts herself with assurance. She reached the courthouse 30 minutes before the scheduled time. The building was a small, aged brick structure with faded signage. Several other individuals were present outside, primarily working-class people attempting to find a moment for justice amidst their jobs and obligations. Inside, the clerk called names with minimal acknowledgement. Danielle remained still, her hands resting in her lap, awaiting her turn. The courtroom felt chilly. It wasn't until she heard her name, Danielle Riggins, case 407B, that her heart began to race. She proceeded to the defendant's table, her heart steady but alert, mirroring the advice she's given to the children in her youth programs. One can't always dictate actions, but one can control one's response, she observed. And that's when she saw him. Judge Gregory Lannister. Late 50s, silver hair neatly combed back, reading glasses perched low on his nose. His reputation was well known. Some described him as firm, while others labeled him arrogant. He glanced at Danielle over the rim of his glasses, his eyebrows subtly raised. Ms. Riggins, he stated, emphasizing her last name, let's proceed. I presume you're here to contest this ticket, issued by a trained officer? Danielle nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I was inside a building, not driving, when the ticket was issued. I have witness statements available if required. He laughed, a genuine chuckle. Naturally, you do, she replied, meeting his gaze. The judge then remarked, you individuals frequently present narratives when appearing before the court. Always the victim. Never your fault. Let me guess. You didn't even see the officer writing it, right? Her jaw tightened slightly. This wasn't simply skepticism. It was a more pointed feeling, and everyone in that courtroom could sense it. But Danielle remained composed, even as the atmosphere shifted. She recognized this was merely the start. Danielle did not react. She had encountered harsher remarks, both in delivery and purpose. However, hearing it from a judge in a courtroom populated by strangers carried a distinct discomfort. A heavy silence filled the room. People avoided reaction, though several eyes moved between her and the bench. Even the bailiff appeared uneasy. Your Honor, Danielle stated, maintaining a calm voice, I have proof I was inside. A sign-in log from the youth center. It displays my name and timestamp. Judge Lannister reclined in his chair and smirked. You believe a log anyone can write improves anything? That's cute. A few quiet gasps arose from the back. Danielle noticed them. She also heard her heartbeat in her ears. But she remained focused. She wasn't present to be liked. She was present because she understood what was correct. I'm simply requesting the citation be reviewed in light of the facts, she replied. Oh, the facts, he mocked. Well, let me tell you the facts. I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've seen all the angles. You people always want the rules bent when they don't go your way. The words landed like slaps. Not just the content, the way he said them. He treated her as if she were a child occupying his valuable time. Danielle remained silent. A response wasn't necessary. He examined her citation once more, leafing through several pages. What is this? He inquired. You didn't even secure legal representation? No, she replied, her voice calm. I am capable of representing myself. A brief, sharp laugh escaped him. Naturally, he said, turning to the clerk. Next time, we'll mandate representation. Perhaps that will eliminate the theatrics. A woman seated towards the back, middle-aged and white, holding a traffic ticket herself, noticed Danielle. She appeared stunned and visibly uncomfortable, quickly averting her gaze when Danielle's eyes met hers. Danielle paused, composing herself. She hadn't intended to confront authority, yet she wouldn't allow her dignity to be disrespected. Your Honor, she began, carefully selecting each word. I'd like the court reporter to read back your comments. The effect of this request was palpable, noticeably shifting the atmosphere in the room. Judge Lannister blinked. Please repeat the last few remarks for the record. The court reporter, a young man named Vince, shifted in his chair. Mr. Tiller, the judge snapped. We don't have time for this. Just proceed. Danielle remained still. Then I will replay it myself. She retrieved her phone from her back pocket. Several people in the gallery leaned forward, curious about what was about to happen. Ms. Riggins, the judge stated, her voice now firm, recording in a courtroom is a violation. I recorded myself, not the proceedings, she responded softly. It's legal in this state, particularly for personal safety. She indicated the screen. Her own voice played back, quiet and steady. Then his voice followed. Every word was audible. You people always come in here with stories. That's cute. The statement reverberated in the room, seemingly as if the ceiling had split open. Judge Lannister's expression changed, initially showing confusion, then irritation, and finally something akin to fear. He leaned forward. That recording is out of order, he stated. No, sir, Danielle said quietly. What you said was out of order. A low whistle escaped someone in the gallery, quickly stifled by a hand covering their mouth. The bailiff moved forward but refrained from touching her. He remained silent, positioned between the two, uncertain of his next action. Danielle returned the phone to her pocket. She didn't smile. She didn't appear smug, but she looked directly at the judge and didn't blink once. He lifted his gavel but didn't strike it. His eyes moved towards the court clerk, then to the bailiff. For a fleeting moment, he seemed to lose command of the room. However, the significant change didn't occur until the recess was called. That's when activity began behind the scenes. The judge announced a 15-minute recess, and the courtroom began to clear. Danielle rose, murmured, extended her limbs. Danielle remained seated. She wasn't finished. Her hands were still, fingers softly intertwined. She showed no tremor. Her composure wasn't rooted in fear. It was a calculated approach. She's worked with numerous children who were disadvantaged by systems that fail to hear them. She consistently advised them to record everything. Even quietude can serve as proof. Now, it was her turn to act on her own counsel. She retrieved her phone once more, this time to initiate a call. Danielle reviewed her contacts and selected one named Ethics Board Local, a number she had saved years earlier following a school board hearing involving one of her students. She hadn't anticipated needing it personally. A woman responded, stating Judicial Oversight Office, South Georgia District. This is Ms. Carla Shep. How can I help? Danielle maintained a low, calm, and professional tone. Milisegun Shep. My name is Danielle Riggins. I am presently located at the Macon Municipal Courthouse, Room B. I have just experienced inappropriate conduct from a sitting judge. I possess an audio recording that potentially constitutes judicial misconduct. There was a pause on the line. I see, Ms. Shep stated slowly. Are you presently inside the courtroom? We're on recess. 15 minutes, give or take. Could you briefly describe what occurred? Danielle recounted the events accurately. Her summary contained no exaggeration, only factual details. The judge's comments, including mockery, the denial of the court reporter's request to read back the transcript, laughter, and dismissiveness were concerning. She stated, I have a voice memo of the remarks. I didn't record the courtroom, just my own audio. This is legal under state code, 16 to Order 11, 62. A pause followed, then the statement, Ms. Riggins, I'd like to escalate this to a supervising judicial officer. Can you remain in the courthouse? Her response was yes. The concluding words were, I'm dispatching someone now. Danielle ended the call, placed her phone in her purse, and released a quiet breath. She anticipated no accolades. She hadn't even expected victory, but she wasn't retreating. A young man, in his early 20s, visibly anxious and restless, approached her from across the room, waiting for his own case. Ma'am, he murmured, that was incredible. What you did required considerable bravery. Danielle offered a courteous smile. It's not bravery when it's simply the truth. He nodded swiftly and retreated. Several others glanced in her direction, not with sympathy, but with interest. Something was different. They sensed it. 10 minutes elapsed. People began returning to the courtroom. The judge was delayed. The clerk appeared anxious. Then the door beside the bench opened, but it wasn't Lannister who entered. A tall woman in her early 60s, dressed in a tailored gray suit with short platinum hair and sharp eyes, appeared. She proceeded directly to the clerk, bent forward, spoke quietly, and then looked up at the courtroom. Everyone, please remain seated, she announced. A murmur spread through the room. Judge Lannister will not be returning to the bench this morning. Danielle remained still. I am supervising Judge Merrill Vaughn, and I will be taking over this docket. She paused. Before we continue, I need to speak with Ms. Riggins privately. Please follow me, ma'am. Danielle stood, straightened her bag, and followed Judge Vaughn through the side door. The hallway felt narrow and was still. Judge Vaughn guided her into a small conference room and shut the door. I have listened to a portion of the recording, she stated without taking a seat. I'm also informed of a previous complaint against Judge Lannister. These details might support an active inquiry. Danielle remained motionless, observing her. I must ask, Vaughn proceeded, will you sign a sworn statement and present the recording as proof? Yes, Danielle responded without pause. Judge Vaughn nodded once. Unbeknownst to Danielle, her voice, recorded during a moment of quiet self-preservation, was poised to trigger events exceeding the expectations of anyone present in that courthouse. Danielle re-entered the courtroom, with Judge Vaughn immediately following. The atmosphere had noticeably changed. Conversations were subdued, and expressions were more attentive. Several individuals who had previously disregarded her were now attentive, observing her with what appeared to be respect, or perhaps curiosity. Regardless of the nature of their attention, she perceived it, yet remained composed. She returned to her seat at the defendant's table as Judge Vaughn approached the bench and addressed the court clerk. Proceeding with Case 407B, she announced, Ms. Danielle Riggins is present. Judge Lannister is officially recused pending review. The announcement settled over the room with a sharp impact. It wasn't simply a brief absence. The judge was gone, and seemingly without return. The thought remained unspoken, yet palpable. Danielle remained still, awaiting further instruction. Judge Vaughn examined the citation and Danielle's accompanying paperwork. This included the witness statement, the center's login sheet, and even a timestamp text she had sent to her supervisor when she arrived that day. The judge looked up. This is thorough, Ms. Riggins. You're clearly someone who values evidence. Danielle nodded once. Working with young people, I've observed firsthand how things can unravel without proper preparation. There is a slight hesitation before Judge Vaughn responded. It's a lesson more people should adopt as they mature, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't sympathy, simply recognition. One woman seeing another who chose not to compromise. Judge Vaughn turned the citation over, wrote something, and gave it back to the clerk. This citation is voided, she stated. Ms. Riggins was released. Danielle did not smile. She merely collected her belongings. However, before she could leave, the judge stated, for the record, your behavior in this courtroom, considering the situation, was remarkable. You maintained composure and dignity despite an unfortunate series of events. Danielle then permitted herself a brief, weary smile. Thank you, she said. She departed the room as silently as she had arrived. But the atmosphere outside was altered. The hallway was filled with a palpable sense of unease. A courtroom aide, a young woman wearing dark-rimmed glasses and speaking with a hesitant tone, softly stopped Danielle near the exit. Are you the one who recorded him? She inquired, her eyes widening. I am, Danielle responded. The aide looked around before saying, you weren't the first. But you might be the one who finally got them to act. Danielle raised her eyebrows a little. Others tried. There have been complaints, she murmured. But nothing ever stuck, either no proof or no follow-through. It was difficult to gain traction until someone possessed the courage and the evidence. Danielle remained silent. She felt no need to speak. Stepping outside, she inhaled deeply. The air seemed heavier than normal, not due to the weather, but because of the events of the past hour. As she approached her vehicle, her phone vibrated in her pocket. A new voicemail had arrived. She pressed play. Ms. Riggins, this is Agent Walt Desmond with the Georgia State Commission on Judicial Conduct. An initial recording from a Macon courthouse arrived this morning. We need to discuss a possible behavioral pattern concerning Judge Gregory Lannister. Please return our call at your earliest convenience. Danielle rested against the car door. Her intention wasn't to discredit a judge. She came to contest a traffic ticket. However, the truth unfolds according to its own schedule. And occasionally, when you voice a concern, you may inadvertently represent the interests of many others. By sundown that day, Danielle would discover the true extent of the situation. Danielle was halfway home when her phone rang again. She considered ignoring the call while driving, but the number displayed an official-looking area code for 7-8. She pulled over to the parking lot of a small grocery store in Warner Robins, parking under the shade of a faded sign, and answered, "Ms. Riggins, this is Agent Desmond. Thank you for returning the call." His voice remained calm, but was precise, a person who carefully considered words before speaking. "We reviewed the audio," he continued, "and it's clear. Furthermore, it corresponds with prior grievances against Judge Lannister submitted during the last 3 years. Your testimony could be crucial in initiating an internal ethics review that has been delayed." Danielle tightened her grip on the steering wheel with her free hand. "What are the next steps?" she asked. "There was more," Desmond added. "An anonymous tip arrived this morning, shortly after your complaint was released on the internal channel. The tip contained financial records associated with Judge Lannister, including offshore transfers, unauthorized reimbursements, and a concerning pattern of rulings in favor of contractors with ties to a private law firm in Augusta." Danielle paused, visibly surprised. Could this be criminal corruption? Affirmative. And with this development, the situation extends beyond a simple personnel issue. It may involve criminal activity. She didn't respond immediately. Desmond continued, "You've already accomplished a lot. If you are willing, we might require a statement. You wouldn't be obligated to testify unless the investigation becomes more serious, and you would receive legal assistance throughout the process." Danielle breathed out, "I will do what is necessary." "Understood," he replied. "You will be contacted by one of our ethics advisors by end of day." "Thank you, Ms. Riggins. You've made more of a difference than you realize." The call concluded. Danielle remained still in her car for a few minutes, the quiet sound of faraway traffic forming the backdrop. She wasn't certain whether she felt fear or power, perhaps a combination of both. She didn't share with Alia immediately, not due to concealment, but because she needed some time to process it herself. Later that evening, following dinner, as Alia cleaned the dishes, she inquired, "So, how did it go?" Danielle offered a small smile, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Let's just say I believe the judge won't be processing many more tickets." Alia grinned. "You didn't strike him, did you?" Danielle laughed. "No, darling, but I made my point." The television played the local 6 o'clock news in the background. Danielle wasn't truly paying attention until the anchor delivered news that caught her focus. Breaking. A municipal judge in Macon is currently suspended from their position while an investigation proceeds regarding claims of misconduct. These allegations include discriminatory behavior and potential ethics violations. Alia accidentally dropped a dish into the sink. "Wait, is that him? Is that your judge?" Danielle asked, slowly sitting down. "Looks like it," she replied. The anchor reported that sources verified the investigation began following a complaint filed earlier today by a local resident, an action that has now initiated an internal review of the judge's prior decisions. Financial documents, sent anonymously to the State Oversight Commission, seem to indicate connections between the judge and several private developers who have received advantages from his rulings. Alia looked at the screen, then at her mother, asking, "You really did that?" Danielle looked at her. "I didn't do all that. I just said something. The rest have been waiting to come out." Alia's face softened. "I'm proud of you, Mama." Danielle touched her daughter's cheek gently. "It's not always about being loud. Sometimes it's just about refusing to stay quiet." Her phone buzzed again, this time a text. New voicemail 1 minute long. She hit play. "Ms. Riggins, this is ADA Kendra Malloy from the Bibb County District Attorney's Office. Thank you for providing the recording. Judge Lannister was taken into custody this afternoon for questioning. Currently, the ethics violations are under formal review and criminal charges are being considered. We would appreciate the opportunity to speak further with you if you are available. Please contact me at your convenience." Danielle observed the screen, then looked up. Alia was watching her, eyes wide. "What now?" she asked. Danielle shook her head. "Now, I will call them back." Unbeknownst to her, a significant number of individuals would come forward in the days following, spurred by her resolute stance conveyed through a voice memo and unwavering resolve. Within 48 hours, Danielle's name circulated discreetly among legal offices, community groups, and even local newsrooms, not as a figure of fame, but as an emblem. She had not sought any of this recognition. She continued going to work, continued picking up Alia from school, and continued reminding the boys at the youth center to keep their pants up and their heads higher. However, things around her began to change. The first indication arrived the following week when Pastor Reuben Fields, who ran a coalition for court reform in Central Georgia, called her during her lunch break. "You don't know me, Ms. Riggins," he began, "but I've known about you since Tuesday. What you did. It wasn't insignificant." Danielle was in her car outside the community center with a half-finished sandwich on her lap. "I didn't do it for attention." "I know," he stated. "That's why people are paying attention." He requested her to speak at a future town hall. A simple request, just a few words about resilience, about respect, about not allowing authority to dominate individuals who are not always able to retaliate. She paused, but ultimately consented. That evening, Alia assisted her in choosing her outfit. Danielle requested a simple event. Alia playfully suggested, while playfully tossing her a colorful scarf, that someone might capture the occasion for Instagram. "Might as well look unbothered and cute," she said. The town hall was unassuming, with folding chairs, plastic tablecloths, a few trays of donated cookies, and sweet tea. Danielle chose not to bring notes. She stood before approximately 50 people, hands by her sides, and spoke as if addressing one individual. "I didn't record that judge because I wanted to take him down," she stated. "I acted because I'd witnessed too many deserving individuals disregarded, and I refused to suffer a similar fate," the audience acknowledged with nods. Several individuals dabbed their eyes. As she concluded her statement, the attendees rose to applaud. Subsequently, an older woman, adorned with a wide-brimmed hat and holding a folder, approached her. She identified herself as Geraldine Baker, a retired schoolteacher. "I filed a complaint against that same judge in 2021. She stated, her voice gravelly but clear. "They dismissed it, claiming it lacked merit." Perhaps now, someone would listen. Danielle took the folder from her hands. "I'll ensure someone does." In the days that followed, Danielle received more calls. A podcast producer from Birmingham, a law student from Emory who wanted to write her thesis on ethical failures in lower courts, and a public defender in Albany who asked if Danielle would participate in a courtroom training session for junior attorneys. She declined most requests, not because she was indifferent. She simply wished to avoid having her name become a hashtag. Her goal was for the children she worked with to view her as the same woman who had taught them resume writing and guided them through difficult conversations with their parents. However, she agreed to certain requests, particularly when she understood how many individuals needed reassurance that they weren't irrational. Activity at the center increased. Contributions arrived from people residing outside of Macon. A woman in Tampa contributed 20 backpacks, along with a handwritten message, "For the kids you champion and for the ones you're championing." "Thank you, Danielle." Alia seemed to gain confidence, too. One afternoon, she announced, "Ms. Brenner had us write in civics class about someone in our community who stood up for justice. I wrote about you." Danielle was surprised, asking, "Really?" Alia replied casually, "I was planning to choose John Lewis, but he's the obvious choice." Danielle chuckled. "I don't think I'm in his league," Alia remarked. Danielle responded, "I think you'd surprise yourself." What truly astonished Danielle, however, was the number of individuals who had been waiting quietly and with patience for another person to initiate action. 3 months later, Danielle was seated on the rear steps of the youth center shortly after closing time. The last of the teens had departed for the day, their laughter still resonating softly throughout the parking lot. The Georgia heat lingered, even as the sun descended, casting shadows on the fractured pavement. She took a drink from a water bottle and allowed her body to recover. It had been a demanding day and a demanding few months. She had presented at 4 panels, completed 2 interviews, and received a volume of inbox messages she couldn't manage. The investigation into Judge Lannister had expanded beyond her initial expectations. Following the release of the financial records, additional complaints emerged, not only from Macon, but also from surrounding counties. Rumors circulated suggesting the district attorney, could file formal charges. The story had been featured on a national justice blog, and certain advocacy groups were now referencing Danielle's case in their training programs. However, all of that seemed secondary to what she truly prioritized. That day began with her witnessing Quentin, one of her teens, perform his debut spoken word poem at an open mic. He previously avoided eye contact. Now, he stood on stage, telling the audience, when they try to shrink you, that's proof you're already too big to fit their box. No applause was necessary. That single moment justified all the effort. While she was seated, the center's director, Mr. Lou Bailey, came outside. A large man with gentle eyes and a deliberate pace settled beside her with a soft exhale. You know, he began after a moment, most people wouldn't have acted as you did. Danielle kept her gaze forward. It didn't feel like a decision. He nodded thoughtfully. It rarely does when it's the correct action. We've seen staff depart and arrive, but I've never witnessed this place so lively. You provided these children with a unique experience. She allowed the sentiment to resonate. Occasionally, she stated, I believe I simply felt worn out, weary of holding it back. That man seemed to assume he could address me as if I possessed no value, and for a brief moment, I nearly allowed it. However, I then recalled the advice I impart to these children daily. Maintain your posture, make your voice heard, and I understood that I couldn't request that of them if I was unwilling to embody it myself. Mr. Bailey murmured a subdued, and then rose. Are you prepared to secure the premises? Yes. Please allow me a moment. Once he entered the building, Danielle gazed upwards at the sky. A few stars began to appear, dim and dispersed, yet present. She considered the individuals who had remained silent, perhaps because they believed their opinion wouldn't be impactful, or they feared negative consequences, or they were simply weary. And she understood. She genuinely did. However, someone must initiate action. That doesn't signify superiority. It simply indicates they were frustrated enough to proceed, even when the situation felt unstable. Prior to departing, she retrieved her phone and composed a brief message on her social media page, an account she hadn't accessed in weeks. The message read, if it feels like no one sees you, speak anyway. If it feels like they don't hear you, speak anyway. You never know who's watching. After pausing, waiting for a reason to share, she placed her phone in her bag, and secured the door behind her. Occasionally, bravery appears forceful, accompanied by raised fists and resounding chants. Sometimes, the path to change is not dramatic. It can be quiet, consistent, respectful, and involves simply appearing in a courthouse, even when unexpected. Danielle didn't require a platform to create change. She only needed to be present, speak honestly, and refuse to be silenced. In doing so, she not only defended herself, but also created an opportunity for Geraldine, for Quentin, for every voice that had been overlooked for too long, because authentic justice doesn't always begin with grand gestures. Occasionally, it begins with the youngest, with someone unwilling to yield. Should this narrative resonated with you, if it brought to mind someone in your life, or perhaps even reminded you of yourself, please consider subscribing, sharing it, and discussing it, as stories like this are not simply intended to be heard, but meant to be remembered. A 12-year-old boy, Tyrese Porter, entered a bank to deposit his birthday money. What should have been a proud moment became embarrassing until his mother arrived and altered the situation without raising her voice. Tyrese Porter wasn't typically a nervous child. He was quick with a joke, fast on the court, and intelligent enough to keep up with children 2 grades older. This morning, a clammy feeling gripped his hands, and his breath came in short bursts as he gazed up at the large glass doors of Crestmark Bank on Fremont Avenue in Tempe, Arizona. He had just celebrated his 12th birthday, and this marked his first independent deposit. The envelope within his hoodie pocket contained precisely $220. It was birthday money, a mix of 5s, 10s, and a couple of 20s. Nothing extravagant. For him, this was the culmination of months of effort, supported by Aunt Claudine, Uncle Leo, and his older cousin Ronald, who worked evening shifts at the auto shop. His mother, Dr. Alicia Monroe, had brought him to this location but remained in the car, offering him a final piece of encouragement through the open window. "You got this, baby. Walk in there confidently, as if you belong. Because you do." He nodded, attempting to conceal the tremor in his legs. The sun shone brightly from mid-morning. The sneakers, still dusty from a pickup game the previous night, made a slight squeak on the floor as he entered. The bank was peaceful, not deserted, but peaceful in a relaxed Saturday atmosphere. A man wearing a button-down shirt was at the kiosk, looking at his phone. An older couple occupied the waiting chairs, quietly discussing some paperwork. Only one woman was in line at the counter, signing a document, with her toddler chewing on a deposit slip nearby. Tyrese positioned himself behind her and attempted to regulate his breathing. He glanced down at the envelope, verifying his handwriting on the exterior. "The porteur Savings." He had rehearsed his signature 3 times the previous night, not because he was required to, but because it seemed like the appropriate action. He observed the digital cue board advance to the subsequent number. The woman and her toddler departed. The bank teller did not even lift her head as she announced, "Next." Tyrese moved forward. "Hello," he said, polite and firm, just as his mother had instructed. "I'm here to deposit into my savings." The teller's eyes lifted slowly. Her name tag indicated she was Margaret Delaney. She appeared to be in her late 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair and a largely unchanging, tight-lipped expression. She offered no smile, no greeting in return. Instead, her gaze immediately fell upon the envelope he held. "And where did you obtain that sum of money?" Tyrese blinked, uncertain if he had understood her question correctly. "It's my birthday money," he stated, raising the envelope slightly. "My aunt and my cousin had given it to me. I simply wanted to deposit it." "Uh-huh," she responded, interrupting him. She bent forward across the counter, examining the bills as if they were questionable. "Do you possess a state-issued ID?" Tyrese paused. "No, Mom, just my school ID and my account number. My mom opened it with me last summer." Margaret released a slow breath through her nose. With the tone adults use when they've had enough of dealing with someone, she shifted her gaze toward a nearby colleague, then returned her attention to Tyrese. "I'm going to need to verify all of this," she stated. "You could be anyone, and this could be anything." Tyrese's chest tightened. He looked down at the envelope again, as if it might have somehow changed since he walked in. But it was still just an envelope, still his name, still the money he'd been given, fair and square. "I can give you the account number," he said. His voice remained calm, but it softened. Margaret did not respond. Instead, she turned to pick up the phone near her station. "I'm calling the manager to assist. Please wait." The man at the kiosk had now turned to observe. The older couple whispered something, their eyes moving toward the boy at the counter. Tyrese felt his face flush, and he tried to avoid looking up. He reached into his backpack for the small blue bank booklet his mom had given him. It didn't seem promising, but Margaret no longer focused on him. She was engaged in a phone conversation, occasionally looking his way with a tense expression. Tyrese felt a knot in his throat. This wasn't the plan. However, the moment she ended the call, things began to deteriorate quicker than he could manage. Margaret placed the phone down with a gentle click and directed a sharp look at Tyrese, as if assessing him for a situation he hadn't agreed to. "Someone will be with you in a minute," she stated briefly. She then focused on her computer screen, her fingers tapping as if he'd disappeared from her view entirely. Tyrese stood there, uncertain whether to speak or simply wait. He looked down at the envelope again. It wasn't trembling, but his hands felt rigid now, as if they didn't quite belong to him. The lobby felt colder, not in temperature, but in feeling. It was as if the atmosphere changed when she asked that first question. The man from the kiosk was still observing. One of the tellers was situated a few windows down. There was no verbal communication, but their eyes consistently averted, quickly glancing away each time Tyrese made eye contact. A tall man wearing a dark gray tie emerged from a hallway located behind the counter. His name tag identified him as Kenneth Flores, branch manager. He moved towards Tyrese deliberately, maintaining a polite demeanor but with a reserved customer service expression that concealed his thoughts. "Hi there," Kenneth stated. "Are you attempting to make a deposit?" Tyrese affirmed with a nod. "Yes, sir, into my savings account." He says it's birthday money. Margaret spoke from her desk without looking up. Kenneth briefly glanced at her, then returned his attention to Tyrese. Do you have an account number on you? Tyrese provided the small blue booklet and the slip with his account info. Kenneth took them and began typing into a tablet. I don't have a state ID, Tyrese added, his voice quieter now. Just school, I'm 12. Kenneth paused for half a second. 12? And you came in by yourself? Kenneth nodded once. Yes, sir, his mom said. Okay, can I take a look at the money? Tyrese offered the envelope. Kenneth opened it with care, as if handling explosives, and began counting the bills directly at the counter. Meanwhile, Margaret commented, I just thought we should be cautious. You never know these days. Her words felt like a sharp rebuke. Tyrese stopped moving. He wasn't sure if a response was expected. He felt uneasy, but remained still. The issue wasn't precisely her words, but the manner in which she delivered them. It felt as though he was being assessed as a risk, a potential danger, an issue requiring control. Kenneth remained silent, completing his count before turning to Tyrese. 220, correct? Tyrese confirmed with a nod. Okay, I need a moment. I'll verify the account. As Kenneth moved away, Tyrese stood still, the envelope no longer in his grasp. A constriction formed in his throat. He resisted the urge to cry, unwilling to do so in the presence of unfamiliar people. He attempted to recall what his mom always said, You're not the problem, baby. You're the reason someone else gets to grow today. However, at that moment, it didn't feel like anyone was learning anything. A woman a few spots behind in line appeared as though she might speak. She opened her mouth, then simply looked at her phone instead. When Kenneth returned, he handed Tyrese the slip confirming the account and deposit total. You're all set, he said. It's gone through, Tyrese whispered, thanking him. As he turned to leave, Margaret quietly added, better safe than sorry. The comment wasn't loud, but it was audible. Tyrese halted his departure. His ears burned once more. He desired to leave, yet also felt compelled to say something, anything at all. Instead, he simply reversed direction toward the exit, suppressing the words he couldn't voice. However, beyond those doors, a pair of eyes had been observing, and they weren't about to remain silent any longer. The glass door opened slowly, and a woman entered, her presence immediately altering the atmosphere. Dr. Alicia Monroe commanded attention without speaking. Her blazer was a crisp slate blue with subtle pinstripes, and her heels clicked across the polished floor with purpose. Alicia carried herself with an air of assuredness. Heads turned, some driven by curiosity, others by a natural response. She wasn't seeking attention. However, she was here for her son. The moment she entered, Tyrese noticed her. His shoulders tightened, not with fear, but with something akin to relief. It was like finding the handle on a locked door. Margaret looked up. Her expression tightened briefly, as if anticipating this moment. Alicia didn't immediately go to the counter. Instead, she walked directly to her son, placed a gentle hand on his back, and spoke to him, her voice low enough for only him to hear. You okay? Tyrese nodded, though not convincingly. She refrained from pushing the matter. Instead, she shifted her attention to the counter, making eye contact with Margaret, then Kenneth, who had returned, perceiving a change in the atmosphere. Good morning, Alicia stated, her voice steady and composed. I'm Dr. Alicia Monroe. Tyrese is my son. Kenneth adjusted his throat and offered a brief, polite smile. Yes, ma'am, everything is handled. His deposit has been processed. That isn't what I'm here to discuss, she responded. Her voice remained level. There is no need to raise it. Each word broke the silence. I observed my son enter here independently today, displaying pride and readiness to accomplish something adults frequently advise children to do, to be responsible. Rather than receiving guidance, he experienced questioning, doubt, and humiliation. Margaret's face reddened. Ma'am, I was simply adhering to protocol. Your protocol does not involve accusing a child of suspicious conduct because he arrived with cash on his birthday. Kenneth intervened promptly. Dr. Monroe, I want to assure you that was not our goal. Alicia turned slightly, her hands remaining still at her sides. Are you aware of how many accounts my company maintains with this bank, Mr. Flores? Kenneth moved slightly. I understand there are three. Langford Innovations, your personal account, and Monroe Education Group. That is correct, she confirmed. I have directly instructed more than 300 young students in this city regarding financial literacy, predominantly black and brown, many of whom are entering environments where they face immediate judgment. Therefore, I am not unfamiliar with this discussion. A silence descended upon the lobby. Even the toddler from earlier had become quiet. Margaret began to speak, but Alicia raised her hand, not to cut her off, but to momentarily suspend the discussion. This extends beyond just Tyrese. This concerns every child who enters a place like this and is told, whether subtly or overtly, that they don't belong, that they must demonstrate something that no one else is required to demonstrate. Do you request state identification from every child, or just mine? Margaret's voice lowered. That isn't equitable. It's unjust to impose that burden on a 12-year-old simply because you presume something about him before he even greets you. Alicia retreated slightly and indicated her son. He entered the space, behaving as we instruct parents to guide their children. Rather than receiving recognition for his efforts, he was perceived as a potential problem. The elderly couple in the waiting area briefly looked at each other. One of them offered a deliberate nod. While not everyone appeared at ease, they seemed alert. Tyrese observed his mom with wide eyes. It wasn't simply the content of her words that surprised him, but also her delivery. Calm, deliberate. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she seek sympathy. She spoke truthfully before those who were present. I'm not requesting an apology, Alicia stated finally. I am requesting awareness. Yet, as the impact of her words became apparent, Tyrese remained silent, as something within him still felt the need to complete what he began. A brief stillness fell over the room. Kenneth stood rigidly behind the counter, his hands clasped together, reminiscent of a school principal delivering a lecture. Margaret's gaze had dropped, focused on a laminated calendar close to her keyboard. The branch was silent, unusually so. However, Tyrese wasn't noticing any of that. He remained looking at his mom. She hadn't spoken loudly. She didn't need to. The way she held herself was striking, as if each word she selected was a brick intentionally set. He understood she was upset. He sensed it in the tightness of her shoulders. Beyond that, she possessed a protective, steady, and unwavering nature. He aspired to emulate those qualities. Tyrese, she stated, turning slightly. He paused, surprised by her question. He had assumed she would manage the situation as she typically did, sheltering him and resolving issues to spare him involvement. However, she was now presenting him with an option. He glanced at the adults behind the counter. He observed the woman who had made him feel like an outsider. He glanced back at his mom, who stood there as a barrier between him and a world that hadn't yet learned how to properly interact with him. He inhaled deeply. I came in here to complete the tasks adults had instructed me to do, he stated. His voice faltered slightly, but he persevered. Preserve my money, manage it independently, demonstrate responsibility. His hand clenched around the unused envelope still folded in his pocket. I wasn't anticipating any festivities or the like, he added. Margaret looked up at him now. Her expression had softened. I had everything needed, my belongings, my account information, and my school ID. I remained composed throughout, even when I couldn't grasp the reason for the different treatment. He didn't explicitly state it was due to my race, wasn't necessary. The atmosphere made the assumption clear. I simply wanted to deposit my money in the bank, Tyrese concluded. That was my only wish. He turned to Kenneth. My hope is that no one else experiences something similar. Kenneth nodded slowly. You're right, and I'm sorry you were made to feel that way. Alicia listened, raising her chin slightly. We should have done better, he added. Margaret, who had been quiet, finally spoke. I misread the situation. I did, and I'm sorry, Tyrese. Her tone softened now, not entirely without defensiveness, but closer to sincerity. The reason for her words, guilt or understanding, remained unclear, but at least she acknowledged it. Alicia didn't respond immediately. She turned to Tyrese once more. Ready? she inquired. He offered a small nod. Not yet. Kenneth appeared puzzled. Is there anything else we can do? Tyrese turned back towards the counter. Can I make the deposit again? A moment of quiet followed. Alicia smiled faintly. Kenneth quietly chuckled. It's already been processed, but we can review it again. Symbolically, Tyrese moved forward and retrieved the blue bank booklet. Kenneth accepted the booklet and retrieved a new deposit slip. Please complete this one, he said. Tyrese took the pen and wrote deliberately, ensuring a steady hand. He presented the slip, and Kenneth stamped it, acknowledging the action even though it held no practical effect. The focus transcended the numerical entries within the system. It represented a symbolic act of recovering what had been unjustly lost. Margaret observed quietly as Tyrese retrieved the slip, folded it into his booklet, and faced his mom again. All done, he announced. Let's go, Alicia responded. Yet, her gaze paused briefly. On Margaret, then Kenneth, then the young man her son was rapidly developing. But outside, as they entered the bright Arizona sunlight, an unspoken tension remained between them, something that required discussion before they departed. The parking lot was half full, a typical midday pause where heat waves rose from windshields and voices floated from open car windows. Inside the Monroe sedan, everything was still. Alicia closed the driver's side door carefully. Tyrese fastened his seatbelt, then looked out the window for a few silent moments. The building appeared different now, smaller, less imposing. But the feeling of tension in his chest hadn't completely disappeared. Want to talk about it? She asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. Why did she look at me that way? Alicia didn't hurry with her response. She reclined in her seat and inhaled, as if she's answered this question previously, but not in this manner. Because she formed an opinion about who you are before you spoke. That's unfair. No, she stated. It isn't. Tyrese glanced at the envelope once more. Still empty. Still neatly folded. I haven't done anything wrong. You haven't? She inquired. Sometimes the world reacts to perceptions rather than reality. Tyrese remained silent. Then, a question arose. Would she have requested all of that if I were a white kid? Alicia's jaw tightened subtly. It wasn't anger, but more like a pain she'd learned to carry so well that it didn't always surface. She responded no. Probably not. They contemplated that reality for a time. It was an uncomfortable feeling. It wasn't meant to be pleasant, but it was truthful. I felt lost for words at that moment. Tyrese spoke softly. I believe that expressing frustration would only exacerbate the situation. Alicia turned to him. You performed precisely as expected. You remained composed. You voiced your thoughts when prepared, and you presented the truth. Tyrese made eye contact with her. You did not appear displeased that I initially remained silent. She shook her head. No, I felt admiration for you. I still feel admiration for you. He nodded slowly. The tightness in his shoulders began to lessen slightly. Alicia adjusted her seatbelt and focused on the road ahead. This is the reason I encourage you. Why do I expect so much? Not because perfection is required, but because sometimes that's what people expect just for you to be equal. I hate that. I know, she responded. Me too. A beat passed. I wanted her to feel embarrassed, Tyrese said. I wanted her to feel small. I get that, she said. But the goal isn't to shrink people down. It's to open their eyes. Let them carry what they've done, so they can choose to do better next time. But what if they don't? Then that's on them, not on you. Tyrese rested his head against the seat. She didn't offer an apology until you arrived. Alicia observed her son, speaking softly. Occasionally, individuals only behave properly when they understand that the person they are disregarding possesses influence. It isn't correct. However, it occurs. She ought to have treated me with respect from the beginning. Agreed. They remained silent for a brief period. A vehicle parked 2 spaces down, and a woman emerged with a boy, approximately 5 or 6 years old, clutching a plastic coin bank. Alicia offered a small smile. Notice that? Another parent guiding their child in learning about money. Tyrese gazed out the window. I hope he isn't subjected to the experiences I faced. I hope someone like you is present when he arrives. That comment brought a smile to Tyrese's face for the first time that day. He looked at his mom. Do you believe I made a positive impact today? Alicia hesitated. I believe you accomplished something few people would do. You entered there with pride. You exited with your dignity. And along the way, you compelled people to confront their own reflections. He gazed back at the building. Next time I visit, I desire to go alone again. Alicia smiled. That's wise. As she inserted the key into the ignition, there remained one more lesson Tyrese needed to grasp. Something she'd withheld since the moment he entered that bank. The car emitted a quiet hum as Alicia turned the key, but she paused before driving away. Her hand rested on the gear shift, her fingers still for a moment. There's something I didn't tell you, she said, her eyes fixed forward. Tyrese looked over. About what? About that bank? About Margaret. He waited. I've been there before, she said a few months ago. I was opening a secondary business account, and she was the one who helped me. Tyrese blinked. Seriously? She wasn't rude, but she wasn't warm either. She recalled thinking she was distant, like she had somewhere more important to be. I dismissed it as a difficult day. He frowned. So, were you already aware of her behavior? Alicia nodded. I suspected something, but I didn't anticipate you experiencing the most significant impact. Tyrese glanced out the window again, his jaw clenched. Do you believe she acts this way toward other children? I'm unsure, Alicia responded. However, I recognize what prejudice appears as, masked by a smile or its absence. Tyrese settled back in his seat. He felt frustration, not anger, towards his mom, but rather a burden from the complexity that had enveloped something seemingly straightforward. I don't understand, he murmured. People frequently advise doing the right thing, saving money, being polite, and arriving punctually. Then this occurred. Alicia glanced at him. That's because doing the right thing doesn't always guarantee reciprocal treatment. However, it does mean you're developing something irreplaceable. What's that? Character and memory. The kind that remains with you, so when another child experiences it, you'll know precisely how to react. He paused briefly. Then, will this not be the last instance of this kind of event? Alicia slowly shook her head. Likely not. Tyrese breathed deeply through his nose. That's good, she smiled gently. But next time, the impact won't be the same. You will be prepared, and perhaps the people around you will be more capable too, because you compelled them to confront something they wish to avoid. He examined the envelope, repeatedly opening and closing it as if it were origami. Then he stated, I still want to do it properly. The deposit? You already completed it, she responded, looking at the booklet in his lap. No, I mean return another day, enter, complete the form, hand it to someone who shows me respect. Alicia's smile widened. You want to repeat the process. I want to conclude things correctly. He said it without pause. Alicia nodded slowly. We will do that when it's convenient for you. Tyrese straightened up. When I do, I won't question my decisions. I'll walk in as if I'm meant to be there, because you're meant to be, she said. You always have been. Don't allow a single moment to diminish you. He considered those words briefly. Afterward, he opened the glove box, placed the envelope inside, and secured it definitively. There's no reason to keep something that's meaningless. She lifted an eyebrow. Are you certain? Yes, I believe I've just made the most significant contribution already, she chuckled. A quiet feeling originating deep within his chest. You truly are your father's son, she remarked. Tyrese smiled. I say that when I'm being clever. You say it when I'm being wise. They departed the parking lot gradually, the bank receding behind them. As the car joined the main road, Tyrese looked down at the deposit booklet one last time before placing it into his backpack. The numbers were visible. However, the most significant aspect wasn't documented. He had acquired it without spending any money. However, before the day concluded, Tyrese had one final statement. It was a truth not found in formal education. They were midway back when Tyrese spoke again. His tone was even, yet his delivery prompted Alicia to look at him. You ever feel tired of having to prove something every time you walk in a room? She didn't respond immediately. The road stretched ahead, flat and unobstructed, the Arizona sun drawing distinct shadows across the dashboard. She understood the importance of thoughtful replies to questions like that. Constantly, she observed Tyrese focused on his hands. I didn't even do anything wrong, he stated. yet it felt necessary to justify herself, even for a simple deposit. You did, she confirmed. And that's what makes you remarkable in a positive sense. You entered with honesty and departed with your dignity. You refused to allow them to diminish it. He remained silent for a period. Then, he expressed a desire to not feel anger constantly. You don't need to, she responded. Anger isn't the objective, it's a signal. What follows is what holds significance. Tyrese inclined his head, seemingly contemplating her words. So, how should I handle it? She asked. You must bear it constructively. Allow it to refine you, not to make you unyielding. He nodded, as if processing her advice. Alicia stopped at a gas station, needing to purchase a bottle of water before completing the drive. Stepping from the car, she lightly tossed her keys into Tyrese's lap. Lock the doors if you need to. I won't be long. She then entered the store. For the first time that day, Tyrese found himself alone. This time, he had only his thoughts. He glanced down at the keys, then looked back at the parking lot. It wasn't about the bank anymore. It was about the way people viewed him before he even had a chance to speak. About how his mom had faced challenges he hadn't known existed until today. He felt a sense of needing to stand with more confidence, to shoulder a greater burden, despite the unfairness of it. The car door made a sound as Alicia came back with a chilled bottle of water. She gave it to him silently, returned to the driver's seat, and fastened her seatbelt. Tyrese unscrewed the lid and drank. He said, placing the bottle down, I believe the most difficult aspect wasn't her asking all those questions. It was the expression on her face, as if I wasn't worthy of being present. Alicia nodded thoughtfully. That's the method they employ to make you vanish, she said. Not through words, but through uncertainty, through silence. With that expression, he continued, his voice gaining strength, but I didn't vanish. No, you didn't. She reached out and briefly squeezed his hand, adding, and you won't. Not now, not ever. The remainder of the drive was completed in near silence, but it was a silence that felt substantial, not devoid of meaning. As they arrived at the driveway, Tyrese moved forward and gazed at her. Alicia smiled, as she always did. I'm not just going to remember how they treated me, he stated. I'm going to remember how I responded. That's the lesson, she confirmed. That's what makes you unstoppable. Tyrese opened the door, took his backpack, and hesitated. I think next time, he said, I'll bring someone else with me, such as Jordan or Micah, and teach them how to manage it as well. Alicia's face brightened. That's what leaders do, she said. Tyrese offered a small, assured nod. So, I suppose I'm a leader now. He stepped out into the sun, and this time his footsteps didn't sound nervous or unsure. They sounded like someone who knew exactly where he was going. If this story resonated with you, even in a small way, please don't just scroll past. Share it, discuss it, because every child like Tyrese deserves to enter the world with confidence. And if you're still reading, please subscribe. There's more to come.